Well, it's Joshua chapter 2, and we're talking about Rahab, the Rahab story this morning. And I wonder, do you have any family members that I don't want to say you'd be ashamed to bring to church and introduce them to your friends here, but let's just say you might be a little hesitant. I mean, it might be because maybe they lack education in a way that you think most of your friends here might have, or I don't know. It could be this lack of social grace. It could be an accent that they have. Like, let's say they're from southeastern Kentucky and they're Appalachian and they have a little bit of a hillbilly accent. You might think, oh, people think we're backwards people. So we sort of like, I don't know, Cousin Eddie in Vacation, something like that showing up. Might be a little hesitant to introduce him to everybody at church. But I grew up in southeastern Kentucky, and you might not be able to hear it now because it's filtered through about a decade in Texas and now 28 years in Oklahoma. But yes, I used to be a hillbilly, and I guess it's still in there somewhere, not as prominent. But when my wife and I got married, I had already been in Fort Worth for 4 years, and I'd had my master's degree then, and she was from my hometown. So then we got married, so she came to Fort Worth, and she hadn't met many of the people that I knew in Fort Worth yet. So I was scheduled to meet a friend of mine at the library, Southwestern Seminary, and I guess I was running behind a little bit, and you couldn't call cell phones. There weren't cell phones at that time, and so he called my home number. I didn't know all this because I was on my way to the library to meet him. When I walked into the library, he's standing there waiting on me. He said, "Hey, I called your house looking for you." He said, "Funny thing, Ellie Mae Clamp had answered the phone." And I thought this morning, I wish I had a phone message from my sister-in-law that I could play over the house system, and you'd understand why I'm saying you might be hesitant to introduce these people to your friends at church. Boy, these people are hillbillies. You might think about a church dinner. I could never bring my family member to church dinner because you've had trauma at restaurants before with that family member who sees the menu as a suggestion, and they're always trying to order things that aren't on the menu, or they want to tweak it like, I'd like to see if this ribeye special comes in vegetarian or, whatever it might be. They're always sending it back because it's not quite how they ordered it. You've got somebody like that in your family probably, and you're thinking, I'm not sure I want to bring them. I had a student who told me he went out one date with a girl, and she asked the wait staff if she could substitute for the penne fettuccine. And afterwards he said, "Why'd you want to substitute that?" She said, "I'm allergic to penne." And he said, "You're allergic to shape?" You may have had these kind of traumatic situations and think, man, I don't know if I want to introduce those people to my friends at church. Or maybe there's better reason. Maybe they've identified rather publicly with some position or some group of people that you think, well, I don't know how that'll play at my church. You might have heard they voted for a Democrat in some election. And you say, I'm not sure I can introduce them to my friends at church. Or it might be even more severe. Maybe they've done something in the community that was illegal. Maybe they've got some history in drugs, or maybe they swindled the elderly, or maybe they actually committed a crime they'd been convicted of that we'd look at as a heinous crime, like maybe rape or even child abuse or something like that. And we'd understand that. And today we introduced to a woman who was a prostitute. And I wonder if she came in and sat down here with us today, how you'd feel about that. If she were very well known that was what she did with her life. And that's kind of where we are today in Joshua chapter 2. We're introduced to a kind of a shady lady that shows up in the Old Testament and actually shows up here with us today in this sermon. So back to chapter 2, verses 1 through 7, it opens up with a rather strange place for the spies to hide. As Gabby read there, the spies are sent by Joshua immediately. We move from chapter 1, where God says Moses is dead. Joshua, you're now going to lead and get everybody ready. In 3 days, we're crossing the Jordan. And that preparation is being made. But in the meantime, he picks 2 spies. Now, this is a man that knows something about spies. He'd been one in Numbers chapter 13 when Moses sent 12 spies in. Joshua was one of them. And so that's the first thing he thinks to do. He sends 2 spies already in advance to Jericho. And they're going to spy out the land, see how maybe we can tear down those walls, see how we can defeat their fighting men, maybe see how we're going to destroy that city. But the interesting thing is where they end up. Look back there in chapter 2, verse 1. Joshua, son of Nun, secretly sent 2 men as spies from the acacia grove, saying, "Go scout out the land, especially Jericho." So they left. They came to the house of a prostitute named Rahab, and they stayed there. There's no explanation about why they stayed there. It might be that they thought that'd be a good place to go in the middle of the night. You're trying to hide out. Maybe you find a place where men might be coming in and going out. Maybe that'd be a place where you wouldn't draw as much attention. If that was the background for it, it didn't work. Because immediately the king of Jericho knows where they are, and he sends his soldiers there to find them. And it's in the house of a woman, a prostitute named Rahab. Now, what do we know about her? We know she was an ancient woman. We're talking about 3,500 years ago. We know she was a Gentile. And it's not just that she's not a daughter of Abraham, it's that she's part of a people who are now the absolute enemies of the Israelites. She resides in Jericho, and the Israelites have their designs on taking that city for their own and wiping it out completely of all the people who currently live there. So she's an ancient woman. She's a Gentile who's an enemy of the Israelites. She's a woman in a culture that is very male-dominated. But it's interesting that we only know one name from Jericho, and it's her name, Rahab. And then finally, we know she was a prostitute. She sold her body. She provided sexual favors for money. It was a shameful thing to do. We learn in Leviticus 19 that if you allow your daughters to become prostitutes as a part of the law, then it will bring a blight, a plague upon the land. And then a couple of chapters later, we find out that if you're a priest in Israel and your daughter falls into prostitution, the judgment on her is, in order to reclaim the family's honor, she is to be burned by fire. Sure seems strange that they'd end up in her home. And then the men from the king show up, and she lies. She says, "Nope, they're not here. They already have gone. Now, if you hurry along, maybe you can find them, but they're gone from here, and I don't know where they've gone." So she violates the 9th commandment. She bears false witness, but she wouldn't have had the 9th commandment. She's not an Israelite. She doesn't have the Mosaic law. I guess we could give her a little bit of an out there, but that's a tough spot to be in. In that moment, if she says, "Well, yeah, the spies are here," they're going to be killed. So she hides them in her roof, and then she says they've already gone. Now, for those people who say, "I just always tell the truth. I let the chips fall where they may. I just always tell the truth," this is one of those moments in life where maybe you're in a bit of a moral dilemma. If you can think about in the middle of the night, if someone's banging on your door and you go to the door and you look out and there's a woman out there and she's bloodied and she's frantic and she says, "There's a man after me trying to kill me. Please help me." And you discern in that moment that she's genuine and you bring her in and you're trying to call 911. And then there's another banging on the door. And it's a man with an axe. And he wants to know if a woman just came in your house. What do you say? "Yep, she's in here." Maybe that'd be one of those moments of moral dilemma. But that's going to be maybe once in your lifetime. You're in a moment like that. Most of the time, we lie to protect ourselves or to avoid consequences or out of our own pride. But in this moment, there's a lot on the line. And if she tells them where they are, they're going to be executed. But by lying about it, if they discover they're there, she's going to be executed. So we'll cut her a little slack. By her false statement, the spies survive. So that's where we open, with the spies finding themselves in the home of a prostitute, a strange place to hide. And then we hear her confession in verses 8 through 11. And I think this actually does explain why she's willing to risk so much for these 2 Israelite spies. Before the men fell asleep, she went up on the roof and she said to them, I know that the Lord has given you this land and that the terror of you has fallen on us, and everyone who lives in the land is panicking because of you. For we've heard how the Lord dried up the water of the Red Sea before you when you came out of Egypt, and what you did to Sihon and Og, the 2 Amorite kings you completely destroyed across the Jordan. And when we heard this, we lost heart, and everyone's courage failed because of you, for the Lord your God is God in heaven above and on earth below. That's a fantastic confession of faith. Here we find out that Rahab happens to believe that Yahweh is the one true God, and those spies represented the true God. This isn't just one of those, do you believe in God? And she generically says, yeah, I believe in God. She uses the divine name in her confession. When she says there in verse 8 or verse 9, I know that the Lord has given you this land, that might be Lord in your translation, might be all caps, because it actually uses the divine name Yahweh. You know, God has a name, and it's not God, it's not Elohim, it's Yahweh. She uses that divine name here. It's a very specific confession of faith. And then she calls their attention to specific events that God had carried out on behalf of Israel. She mentions the Exodus. She mentions the defeat of Sihon and Og. There's no doubt what God she's confessing. And it actually is a beautiful confession of her faith. And that's why she was willing to risk her life for the spies. And the New Testament gives her a lot of credit for this. Hebrews chapter 11, you know, that hall of fame of faith, Rahab is there. And verse 31 of Hebrews 11, by faith, Rahab the prostitute welcomed the spies in peace and did not perish with those who disobeyed. But James 2:25 goes even a little bit further. Now, this is that place in James where he's asking the question about faith and works. Where he's asking the question, can faith that has no works, can that faith save you? And his answer to that is no. Genuine faith saves you. But faith without works is not genuine faith. It's not the works that save you, but genuine faith, and genuine faith works. So you got 2 examples, James. Give me 2 examples from the Old Testament of people who had faith in God and who acted on that faith, who vindicated their faith in God by their actions. Number 1, Abraham. That's his first one. Now, I'm guessing if I asked you the same question, many of you would have come up with Abraham first choice. He's the number 1 pick in that draft. Now, you get one more choice from the Old Testament. You pick it. Anybody you want to choose. How long would it take you to get down the list to Rahab? For James, he has 2 picks. His first is Abraham, and then he mentions Rahab. And it's James 2:25. In that faith without works is useless, he says, you see, a person is justified by works and not by faith alone. In the same way, wasn't Rahab the prostitute also justified by works in receiving the spies and sending them out a different way? It was her faith that inspired her to hide them, and the New Testament gives her great credit for that. And then we have the scarlet cord of salvation, beginning in verse 12. Now please swear to me by the Lord that you will show kindness to my father's family, because I show kindness to you. Give me a sure sign that you will spare the lives of my father, mother, brothers, sisters, and all who belong to them, and save us from death. And they answered, the 2 spies answered her, we will give our lives for yours. If you don't report our mission, we will show kindness and faithfulness to you when the Lord gives us the land. Then she let them down by a rope through the window, since she'd lived in a house that was built into the wall of the city. Go to the hill country so that the men pursuing you won't find you, she said to them. Hide there for 3 days until they return. Afterward, go your way. And then the men said to her, we will be free from this oath that you made us swear, unless when we enter the land, you tie this scarlet cord to the window through which you let us down. and then bring your father, mother, brothers, and all your father's family into our house. If anyone goes out the doors of your house, his death will be his own fault, and we will be innocent. But if anyone with you in the house shall be harmed, his death will be on us. And if you report our mission, we're free from the oath you made us swear." Now this may seem like, well, that's a fair trade. She risked her life for them. They should reward her by sparing her life when the Israelites show up to destroy Jericho. But when God gave the Israelites the battle plan, in Deuteronomy, when he's telling them, now when you go into the promised land, here's the way you have to wage war. This causes a bit of a problem. We first hear it in Deuteronomy chapter 7, verse 2. "When the Lord your God delivers them over to you," that is the residents of Canaan, "and you defeat them, you must completely destroy them. Make no treaty with them and show them no mercy. You must not intermarry with them. You must not give your daughters to their sons or take their daughters for your sons, because they will turn your sons away from me to worship other gods." And then even more clearly in Deuteronomy chapter 20, starting at verse 16, he says, "However, you must not let any living thing survive among the cities of these people the Lord your God is giving you as an inheritance. You must completely destroy them: the Hittite, Amorite, Canaanite, Perizzite, Hivite, Jebusite, as the Lord your God has commanded you, so that they won't teach you to do all the detestable acts they do for their gods, and you sin against the Lord your God." So they've been commanded, you can't make a treaty. Everybody has to die in Canaan, or their worship will influence yours. But because of her faith, because of her confession, and her willingness to risk her life for theirs, they say, okay. It was not an easy choice for them. But there's three caveats to it. Yes, we'll spare you. But there's three things. First, you can't tell anybody our plan. Mum's the word. Second, you have to let this scarlet rope, this scarlet cord, hang out the window. The one you're letting us down on, it got to be hanging there when we return with the troops. And third, your whole family that you want to be saved, they all have to be in your home, or else we won't know they belong to you. Now, that all makes sense, but most interesting is the scarlet cord. Now, maybe sometimes a scarlet cord's just a scarlet cord. But I can't imagine that there's not something more than just a red cord here. About 40 years earlier, they had escaped from Egypt, and by the 10th plague, and the 10th plague was scarlet red blood of a lamb on a doorpost marked off a house as a safe house. Everyone who lived inside of a house in Egypt that had blood on the doorpost, they would be saved, even the firstborn male. Here we are, a little over 40 years later, and those troops are going to be marching around a city 6 days, one time each day, and every time around, don't you think that scarlet cord is going to stand out to them in Rahab's window, and they're going to be reminded that house is a safe house. The people in that house have to be saved. It's the scarlet cord. That's looking back. If you look forward from this moment, about 1,400 years, we have Jesus hanging on a cross, where his scarlet red blood is, again, the instrument of salvation. Like that lamb's blood on a doorpost made that a safe house and was an instrument of salvation. Like this ruby red scarlet cord hanging out her window is an instrument of her and her family's salvation. The blood of Jesus on a cross is also our instrument of salvation. So that's the promise. What happens? Well, we don't find it in chapter 2. We actually have to look forward to chapter 6, verse 22. The Israelites are now invading the city of Jericho. And pick it up at verse 22. Joshua said to the two men who had scouted the land, "Go to the prostitute's house and bring the woman out of there and all who are with her, just as you swore to her." So the young men who'd scouted went in, brought out Rahab and her father, mother, brothers, and all who belonged to her. They brought out her whole family and settled them outside the camp of Israel. They burned the city and everything in it, but they put the silver and gold and articles of bronze and iron in the treasury of the Lord's house. However, Joshua spared Rahab the prostitute, her father's family, and all who belonged to her, because she hid the messengers Joshua had sent to spy on Jericho, and she still lives in Israel today. What a beautiful salvation story. And in this case, it's a salvation by faith story. Because of her faith in the one true God and her willingness to act on it, now it's like a Canaanite Exodus story. It's an Old Testament salvation by faith story. This is one of those where you wrap it up with the bow, and I know there's a lot of death and destruction at Jericho, but the enduring image is Jericho, or Rahab and her family marching out of that smoldering city because of the grace of God. Now, isn't that a story we can all embrace? But it's not just that. There's more to this story. Rahab becomes part of the Israelite community. She's a young woman. You know what happens with young people. A young woman meets a young man, they fall in love. Well, that happens with her. She meets a nice Israelite young man. His name's Salmon. And they get married. This was a woman who'd been a prostitute. Her life has changed. Now she's part of the Israelite community, and she's married to a fine young man named Salmon. And they even have children. And one of those children is named Boaz. You might recognize him because he's the one who marries Ruth after her husband dies. He's like her kinsman redeemer, the Levirate marriage laws. That's the book of Ruth. And they have a son, Boaz and Ruth. His name is Obed. And Obed has a son, and his name is Jesse. And Jesse has a son, and his name is David. This woman, who's known as the prostitute, because of her faith in God and her confession of that, ends up being the great-great-grandmother of King David. What a story of God's grace. Now, I asked you earlier what you might think about Rahab showing up at church on Sunday morning. And I'm not suggesting there's a prostitute in the house. But if you look to your right, go ahead. Just look to your right. Now, I'm not suggesting that person, neither their name is Rahab or they are a prostitute. But here's what I would tell you. That person sitting to your right is someone who is desperately in need of God's grace, just like Rahab. Look to your left. Probably not a Rahab there, hopefully not a prostitute, but someone who's desperately in need of God's grace. And that person to your left that you're looking at right now, the person to their right, that person's also desperately in need of God's grace. In a sense, I'm Rahab, and so are you. And thanks be to God for His grace. Stand with me. Our Father, I pray if there's someone here today who feels like their life is so messed up, they're so far away from you. Maybe they feel family members are hesitant to embrace them, or maybe even ashamed of them. Maybe they just don't feel worthy. Father, I pray you would stir in their heart with the truth of the story of Rahab, that your grace can reach us anywhere and change our lives. For those who've experienced God's grace, I pray today we find that joy renewed in God's great grace to us. I pray it in the strong name of Jesus. Amen.